the cable access has recorded all of these. And so they come out to schools as I do these, and they set up their camera and all that kind of thing. They're using our school committee setup tonight, so it's really kind of awkward because that and that are the cameras, and I have to use one of these. So unless I want to carry this around, I kind of have to hang here. I think I'll probably end up carrying it around, so this is a little awkward for me. Thanks for coming. Nice to see you all. Susan Ditkoff, who is our school committee chair, is here. There may be some other school committee members who come in. I'll try to introduce them as well. So usually what I do with these is sort of make a couple comments to open and then just take your questions, and we'll go for an hour or so, okay? Sound good? Let me talk about a couple of things up front. Calendar may not concern some of you as much as it did or does some parents in some schools, but I'll tell you about it anyhow. You may have older kids. So we did a survey around the 6 snow days that we had, which actually compared to some of the state is not a huge number. My wife works in a district in Salem, Massachusetts, where I think they were at 10 or 11. They're going to school April vacation week. Thank you very much. So you know what we're doing during vacation week, right? We surveyed people, and the good news is we got over 5,000 responses to that survey. It may be a little bit skewed. In the middle of our survey, the New York Times ran an article about snow days in Massachusetts, and as part of that article on snow days, they actually talked about how Brookline was surveying parents and staff, and they were nice enough to put the link to the survey into the article, so we may have a number of readers of the New York Times who live somewhere else who just felt the need to comment on our survey. I don't know. But people told us a couple of things. First of all, they said that if we needed to make up additional days, we're at the 26th now, that 26th of June, that we should start with Good Friday. That's what they said fairly overwhelmingly. Their second choice was something I actually don't have the option of doing. It's actually easy to check off options that you don't actually have the ability to do. And that was add time to the day, which we can't do. The commissioner won't allow it. Some of you have seen that documentation. I think we sent it out. He has this very long memo on why 180 days is so important. And we don't actually have that authority. And then lower on the list were Saturdays and April vacation. Where's the moaning? Moaning at Saturdays. That was pretty loud. And then so I asked another question there, which was, would you like us to use some of these strategies to make the year end earlier? Say June 19th. That would be great. It's a week earlier. It gets us out of that last week. And overwhelmingly, 70% of people, staff and parents, said yes. And I have to say to you that I actually don't believe you on that survey. I don't. I think the better question would have been, here's a way to make up 5 days and end earlier. How about Good Friday, 2 Saturdays, and 2 days from April vacation? My sense is 70% of people would have said, no, that's not a good idea. The generality of the question probably made people respond that way, I think. So we're at the 26th. My sense is that's where we're going to stay. And since it's not going to snow anymore, that's it. It's not going to snow anymore. Let me say this. We're not going to have any cancellations for snow. That we're not going to do. So that's where we are. And that's done some havoc with final exam schedules, if you know high schoolers, and with our 8th grade graduations, where some people aren't terribly happy that we won't have those till the 22nd, but that'll be our schedule. The good news is that next year we start before Labor Day, and we have an agreement now with our teachers union that will allow us to at least start teachers before Labor Day each and every year. So students will always, at worst, start on the Tuesday following Labor Day, if not before. And next year they'll start before. We actually pick up 4 days before Labor Day even comes. The second is about space, which I've received some email on. I think there may be some interest in space. I don't know. I just have a strange feeling about that. So Vicki keeps asking me to say once and for all, we are committed on Heath, and that's not going to be an issue and whatever. And I can't. I just told her in my office I'm about 70% there. The good news is that everything's breaking in the right direction, right? We set out on a plan, which was to create modulars at the Baker School, which if you followed all that planning, you know that we don't need space at Baker for next year anyhow if we do that, if we create the 2 modulars. We're on track to do that. Bids came in fine, planning seems to be progressing. We're on a timeline that would have them in for the beginning of the year. And so I'm about 70% able to say we're not going to have to look at any of the other auxiliary plans that we had, which I know people didn't like very much. So we're getting there. And I think in the next month or so, we'll be able to say much more firmly that we're absolutely 100% there. But it's all good news, right? Right now, if you said, I really want you to predict what's going to happen, I'd predict that we have space at Heath School for 2 pre-Ks for next year, right? So that's where we are. There's a lot of other stuff going on around space, right? So you may know right now we have over $500,000 that we spend every year in space rental, and it's all right now associated with early education, all of it. And it's going to go up. It's going to increase because we're out of room at the Pierce School next year. So our strategy at the Pierce School was to have put out a request for proposals to see if anybody had any space near the Pierce School that they could rent to us that we could use for classes at the Pierce School. And I don't know if you might happen to see, the sign's still up. Or if there's office space available, that we got an idea that they might have something to rent that we might be interested in. And so we're negotiating now with some locations to rent some additional space, both for Pierce, some additional office space, those kinds of things that we're out of, and at Pierce in particular. We're also, if you're associated with Devotion School, you know that we are next year going to move the 7th and 8th grade out of the school to Upper Devotion at Old Lincoln. That's what we're calling it for now. Next year, 7th and 8th grade. And the following year, when construction starts at the Devotion School, we're moving 5th and 6th grade with them. What we're doing now is looking for place for K to 4. Because if we can move K to 4 out of the Devotion School site, we save money and pick up time. 2 very valuable things to us, right? So the savings, if you've heard, probably it's in the neighborhood of $5 million in savings. But what's really important to me is the year. We actually save a year on that project if we can move the students out. So we're looking for space, and we have some conversations going with some spaces, not school spaces, that would allow us to move K to 4 out for the time of that construction. And why is that important? It's important because we, quite frankly, need the old Lincoln School in that time frame for the high school. So some of you know that the high school right now is in the neighborhood of 1,900 students, and by 2022 is over 2,600 students. And so we're going to need short-term space and to finish the long-term plan around what we're going to do with the high school. And just real quickly, there's sort of 3 buckets of ideas around what we might do with the high school. We're looking at one option that says build more high school on this site, right? That has some advantages. It preserves one high school. It has some disadvantages, which are that we have traffic problems and parking problems there now, and we're worried about being able to preserve the academic program, right? The configuration of what the buildings would look like, that kind of thing. A second idea is a second high school. Smaller, probably. We have the same problem there that we have with some other ideas like elementary schools, and that is where we're going to build it. So some of you may know that we right now have a consultant looking for us for spaces for a 9th elementary school, but part of their charge is also to keep this idea of the high school in mind, right? And the third idea is not a separate high school, but another building. It would have to be close enough to the high school where we could put one of our significant programs in there. For example, we could put the school within a school program there. We could put something like STEAM initiatives in there of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and the arts. We could start an academy around those kinds of ideas. So all those things are on the table in terms of what we're looking at for the high school. And as I said, we have a couple of consultants, one working on identifying space in town, a second working with us around what that academic program is and how that fits into a facility and what we might be able to do. So the only other issue I'll talk about, and then I'll open it up for your questions, is really budget. I should say up front, this is the part where I say I have certain restrictions. I was at a forum at Lawrence the other morning, and someone said, could you talk with us about the strategy for the override campaign? And I said no, because I'm actually not by law allowed to do that. I can be fined by the Election Commission, so I'm actually not going to do that. But I can talk about the what happens if, right? And so that's really the budget conversation. I mean, we've had to create 2 budgets this year. One which we're very creatively calling the override budget, and the other which we're very creatively calling the no override budget. And they really spell out the differences between these 2 proposals, and I think provide a very stark difference in terms of a vision for the school system. And I use a couple of examples around that, right? I mean, I think if you look at the 3-year model that we put out there that said this is what we'd be able to do over 3 years, it provides a fuller picture. But I'll give you one example, and it's meant as an example. And that is around the ECS program as an example of that. So ECS is Enrichment and Challenge Support, used to be called Gifted and Talented. We put that program through a program review this year, the past 2 years actually, to take a look at what kinds of things we should be doing. And they've done research into what's going on across the country in those areas, right? How does that benefit more students? Well, I mean, what are the kinds of strategies that we can use? And I think these 2 spending plans really play out a bit of our vision in terms of what we want to be able to do, what we believe we can be able to do, even in this time of unprecedented growth. We've grown 38% at K through 8 since 2005. We've grown 25% K through 12 since 2005. Our present kindergarten, 4 weeks ago, cracked 700. I remember when we had the first 600. We went, uh-oh, and now we have a 700, right? You were here. Yeah. So what's the difference? Well, the ECS program review, as I said, really did a lot of work around looking at what's going on across the country, because you don't look at Massachusetts around gifted and talented, quite frankly, in my view, and really identified a look at this program that said this program can really be about achieving differentiation for all students. This program can really be about students who can benefit from in-class kinds of interventions. It's an RTI model for those of you who know response to intervention. So what are the level 1 interventions that can go on in the classroom for students who the curriculum's not meeting their needs? What are the level 2 interventions that may need to be outside of the classroom? They may need to be partnerships with universities that we'll be forming. They may need to be destination imagination kinds of activity. What are those kinds of interventions that can appeal to students, right? The kinds of project-based learning that students may be able to engage in outside of the classroom, integrated with the classroom. And then level 3, who are those students that really would most benefit by subject area acceleration or grade level acceleration? And so it gave us an opportunity to really look across the curriculum and look across our student body and say, instead of talking about a program of are we going to identify kids or not, which is quite frankly not the right conversation, right? It was about how do we institute this so that it benefits all students and helps teachers with strategies around differentiation, right? And so I think that's a real example of the difference, because in the override spending plan, that program is enhanced, obviously, to be able to accomplish that vision. There's addition of math specialists, there's additions of ECS teachers, and we take our coordinator to full time. In the no override budget, the program's eliminated. And to me, in our spending plan, that's one of the starkest differences, because this program's about, as we're trying to structure it now, is about all students. And there are lots of other differences. I will say, because I get asked every time, there's about $1.2 million in total reductions in the no override plan. Some of them are around classroom consolidations in grades 4 through 8. If we're in a no override scenario, we will have classes in that 4th grade to 8th grade range that will be in the range in size from 26 to 29 students. We will. Because there's 5 consolidations in that plan. For those of you who don't know this, I end up saying it so often that I think everybody does. So, but I need to realize people haven't all heard this speech. Since 2005, well, bless you, while we've increased by 38% our student body, our average class size has increased by 1.5 students. Our average. Now that's good. What's not so good in that is our range has gotten wider. Some of you know that. I always have parents who say, yep, I have a kid in one of those classes that is at 24 in third grade. Those didn't exist in 2005. So even though our averages are still good, our range has gotten wider during that time. So why don't I do that? Why don't I stop? That was 15 minutes or so. Yeah, and see what you want to talk about. Anything there or anything else you'd like to talk about? Yes, sir.
So what would be the impact on the BEAT program directly in the no override scenario?
Yeah. Well, no. Well, that depends more on. So most of our so it's harder to predict. Let me say that, because there's nothing really in terms of staffing. We have no plans in next year's spending plan as we did in this spending plan in terms of expanding numbers of classes. I will say I think our ability over the next 3 years to address student need by creating more classes would be hampered. You know, and there's the second question that really has to do, there's a second question that has to do with the debt exclusion around devotion. I mean, we have 2 early education classes built into that project. So, you know, without that debt exclusion, does that project go forward? Does that project get scaled back? What comes out? What'll come out will probably be non-reimbursable, would probably be non-reimbursable spaces. I mean, those kinds of things. We've been committed, as you know, every project that we've built early education spaces into them. Hey, you want to say something to this? Yeah, oh, yeah, right, okay. So, right, so, yeah, there are, thank you for that. So there are two really direct pieces. So the override spending plan that we've put forward actually increases the amount of money that we're able to set aside, separate from other groups, for scholarships. So we've actually targeted $100,000 for scholarships. We've worked real carefully with Vicki around what we think is the need. We think the need is more in the range of $250,000, but we've set aside $100,000 in addition to whatever we have in now, which is very small, for scholarships. One of the stark differences is and we have a 3% increase built into that budget. In the non-override, that scholarship money is gone. It's not there, and I can't tell you what the fee increase will be. I mean, it could be larger, and over time will certainly be larger. So those are the 2 most direct pieces that I can think of. Thank you, Susan. Yes.
I have 2 sons. One who is older, who's 3, who joined BEAT this year at Heath. I want to take this opportunity at least to thank you, Vicki, and Carrie, because he's had an amazing time at Heath.
Great, thank you.
It's just been a wonderful experience, and I just want to share a comment that I think it's actually made a really big difference, and I know that BEAP is sort of moving off sites because it actually speaks to your success. How many kids are actually enrolling in Brookline, right? So how great the reputation is. Everybody wants to move to Brookline, go to school there. But it really has made a really big difference, I think, for Heath to actually be still within its school, part of that overall larger community of the school. I think it gives it a different feel. He's able to see kids that are outside that he knows from other grades, and I think that makes a really big difference. I know you can't speak of exactly what's happening next year, but what do you perceive given the circumstances of needing more space, even so we hope that we will still get 2 classrooms next year at Heath for BEAP, but what about the future years? What does that mean for 2, 3, 4 years?
So thank you for that comment. I will say that when I came here in 2004, we did not have early education classrooms in every one of our elementary schools, and it took us a year to remedy that. A year later, we had classes in every one of our, believe it or not, in 2005, we had at least 1 early education class in every building. And I agree with you that it makes a huge difference to those K-8 schools and for those students. And that's why we were so committed to doing it. I mean, one of the schools that we didn't have a program in was Devotion, which just felt so bizarre to me in that it was at the time by far the largest school in the district, and we weren't providing kids an opportunity to have an extra year there. But a year later we were. And unfortunately, ever since '07 or '08, we've been slowly moving programs out. I think one of the things that people deserve a lot of credit for, school committee deserves a lot of credit for, is we've actually increased the number of classrooms during that time, however. So even while we've moved out and we've had to take on rental or go to the high school or move programs around short term, we've actually added programs to address student need. And we will continue to do that. So we've laid this out in sort of a short/long-term plan. In 17-18, we do need, because of the Heath population itself, we do need to go to one class in 17-18. That's 2017, 2018. That's been the plan. Yeah, sorry, I speak in this really bizarre code. If I start doing my ELLs and BCBAs, and I'll just stop me, okay? Because I can really get on a roll. So that's been the plan for some time. I know that's going to impact, I believe in 17-18, it's going to impact the high school as well. I don't believe other than that, right? I don't believe other than that, as we've projected out the need for K-8 sections at schools, that we've said there's something else that needs to happen.
And is it, I guess I'm not as intimately involved with the planning, and so what were your alternate plans of what's happening with that extra classroom in 17, 18, or?
So probably for that time period, rental space. We're not sure where yet. The commitment we've tried to make, and I think we've lived to date, is to try to make sure we have if programs are out of elementary schools, to try to make sure they're grouped. We don't want singletons. They're hard to administer, and quite frankly, kids don't have some of the experiences that you talked about. It's not the model we're terribly interested in. That's going to be a bit of a challenge for us because we've pretty much maxed out the spaces that we're renting now. So we need to do some work on that. Remember, though, that in either 18 or 19, depending on how quickly we finish the devotion project, 2 rooms open up in the devotion school, and we get to move them back from rental spaces, right? So we have a couple of years to sort of hang on, right? And so that's the plan. I mean, eventually, the school committee stated in our objectives that we've laid out are eventually we want to have pre-K-8 schools. Whether it's every school, which will be harder to achieve initially, right? Because there's not going to come a time anytime soon when the Pierce is going to have extra rooms for that. I mean, right now, I'm looking at kindergarten enrollment numbers, which one thing I didn't talk about. I'm looking at kindergarten enrollment numbers for next year. We haven't reported those publicly yet because we had such an interesting kindergarten registration season where we canceled 6 of the 16 sessions. And so we're behind where we would normally be in terms of enrollment. Even at that, our numbers are fairly large. And what I can say to you here is that the numbers at this building are huge. They're huge. So there's no time soon, unless some of this rental space that I may be looking out on right now, opens up some of those options for us. And it may. If that happens, we're committed to putting pre-K back into the building sooner rather than later.
I also heard a rumor about.
Uh-oh. It's been really nice to see you. I gotta go now.
About the alternate plan maybe being Heath because the other comment I was going to make is it's sometimes really nice actually that most of the kids, at least at Heath, walk to school. You see the parents, you get to know your community.
Right.
And there was,
All right, what was the rumor?
About the community center or something that was across the street from Heath.
Yeah, so we've looked at a number of places. That's on the list. And again, some of those conversations, to be a little bit more global about it, involve other buildings that are town-owned, but under the control of other departments, other than the school department. And, should we be, quite frankly, an ongoing conversation with the town. Is it more feasible for us to spend another X number, $100,000 in rental, or for the rec department to let us use space X? and to really change the dynamics of what we're thinking about around that space. You can probably tell from the way I frame the question where I come down on that issue, right? So we're always involved in those kind of conversations, and they're ongoing. And they really, I mean, the one thing I will say in defense of some other departments, right, is we don't have a monopoly on being impacted by the growth of the number of children in this town, right? That impacts the rec department, right? It impacts lots of other departments, right? And so they have needs that don't get as prominently displayed in the tab as ours. Thank you. Yes.
So I don't know if this is an appropriate comment, but I want to actually say, as someone who has experienced other departments, Beep is amazing. And Beep, honestly, I'm going to get verklempt. Like, it saved my relationship with my son. Like, my son was a disaster last year, and it's because of the amazing people at Beep that he's totally turned it around. I mean, we've been involved with people down at Trust because he was getting speech services,
Yep.
and then we're now at Putterham.
Yep.
In Mary O'Connell's class,
Yep.
which is just genius level. I mean, genius. What's going on there? I had a year of hearing only coded remarks of how he was doing, which was like he had a good day in code, he didn't hit, or it wasn't a good day. And he knew what it meant. And I asked him, I'm like, can you please tell me something different about his day? He knows what you're talking about. Can you tell us something different? And I'll tell you, it hasn't been perfect. I mean, on the very first day of school, Mary had to call me to say,
Vicki, it hasn't been perfect? Oh, sorry. We'll talk about that later on.
I'll just say, like he was hitting his very first day, and I was devastated. I was like, no, he was going to be perfect. But what the conversation was that was so different was, here's what we're going to do. Don't worry. We're going to handle it. And he's going to be okay. And most importantly, we want him to love school and feel good
Right.
about school. And my son loves school and feels good about school. Last summer he said to me when we were away, I don't want to go back to that school, the other place. Mommy. And this year he said to me, Mommy, I don't want it to end. Can I stay at Beep? And he feels that, I feel it, like, it's an incredible program, so to be able to make sure not to cut anything, to expand it, to reward these people who have, I mean, seriously, like, he was on a course where he was going to be, like, in your behavioral classroom, and he's not, he's just been so helped by the amazing services of so many people who have really deserve incredible credit.
Thank you.
Well, and also I have to say that as someone who's in a buffer zone, which is a
Uh-oh, no, it's on buffer zones. That's why I got the podium up here, now I know. Oh, you're in that one, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm not signing up for extended days. You have to qualify for all four. Anyway, I digress.
We can help you with that.
Okay, good. What I love though is that, like, we did a tour of the school, and I went in there and I'm like, oh, this kindergarten, it was actually a kindergarten Heath. I said, it looks like me. I'm like, that's so great. And then I was told, well, Vicki Van does both pre-K and K. And I'm like, well, that's just genius, because my poor kid, who's now will be at 4 schools in 4 years, there's going to be like a smooth
Right.
transition to kindergarten.
Right.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, so it's why that paid off, right? We wanted Vicki to be involved. I mean, X number of years ago, when we discussed this model, we really wanted Vicki more involved in our kindergartens for exactly what you've laid out. Thank you very much for saying that you've made it worth coming to work today. Thank you. Okay, let's go next. Oh, yes.
I don't know if this is on Hancock Village, but do you know how that, if it goes through, will impact South Brookline? And I too in a buffer zone, so. And I'm trying to.
So we have some numbers that we've looked at, and we've tried to play follow the bouncing model, because it's been laid out over whatever number of years this conversation's been going on. I've lost track of some of the time, but it's been laid out as X number of this kind of unit, and so there have been calculations which we've then sort of set aside and looked at our own, because, I mean, I'll give you an example. There was a model earlier on that had these one bedroom with a loft or with an area, right? And I said to the contractor, that's a second bedroom. In our world, at Hancock Village, that's a second bedroom, right? So we've tried to look at those, and the numbers are significant. What we know is in any model we've seen, the numbers are significant enough that given the increase in the Baker population, they will have impact. And given what we're looking at Brookline High School, again, making the same kinds of assumptions across grade spans that we have now, it will have impact. What we don't have any great ideas on yet is timing, because it's supposed to be phased and all of those kinds of things. But we know it will have impact, and as I don't know if you were here earlier, but as I started to talk about that look at a ninth school location, I mean, I was in a meeting with a consultant today, and one of the conversations was, yes, this is where we feel that the need is now. It's a North Brookline need in particular for that school. How do we then address the burgeoning population that we already have here, in addition to the X, whatever X is, that we know is coming? And so we talked about some strategies for buffer zones, for buffer zones and those kinds of things to deal with that. So yes, and as we get firmer information, we can do more with it.
Would they help, like, contribute, funding at all with any of this stuff? Because it will have a major impact. I mean, you're looking at, Brookline's a very expensive place to live. And so South Brookline, a little bit better, closer to the city, sometimes better, but it will have.
So let me answer that this way. Now, let me answer that this way. Two things. And I'm best if I speak in what happens in other places and models I've seen. And I can say we've had some of these conversations over that number of years, some of the things I'm about to lay out. I mean, there are parts of the country when you do something like that, you contribute a school. There are parts of the country where you build something like that and you build a school. There are also parts of the country where when somebody would do something like that, that you would factor in an early learning center if you were going to build a high-rise. Part of that development would be that, or space for X number of kindergartens or whatever. We've tried to interject those kind of conversations into this. That's been very difficult given the relationship back and forth over this, but we haven't given up on that yet. It's a great question. Thank you. Hi.
So I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
I want to just also put a plug in for Mary and for Regina and for everybody at Byram, because my child also was on the verge of competing in school and terrible the next 14 years of his life, or all of his life, and he absolutely loved it. I went to there are many of them, I'm sure, and do all of them. So it's not at the school, and I understand that there's benefit to having it at the school,
Yeah.
but the way that they create the setting, it's an absolute school environment. And even though he goes to temple there too, it's Monday to Friday, it's school. And so, first that part.
Great, thank you.
On the kindergarten buffer zone, do you know when you'll have numbers, no numbers?
You're talking about for assignment to kindergarten for next year. Yeah, so what we, so what we do now, in that we've changed the process a little bit to make sure we have as much information at any given time before we make decisions as we can, is anybody who is registered before, I think it's May 1st, has an assignment before May 15th. And what that allows us to do is to make sure that we can guarantee that every child, every family that was registered before that time has access to one of our orientations in kindergarten at the school. So you will have a slot, you will be able to go to the school for an orientation program, we guarantee it. So May 1st, registered by May 1st, you're already registered. By May 15th at worst. If we begin to see that we have some obvious things, we just do them. We just make the assignments. And we have now 11 or so years of patterns that we can rely on, although this year is a little different because of what I mentioned earlier. The bad news is our registration was way down out of those initial sessions. The good news is if you come in here on any given day, you get to spend time, it's great for us, with children because they're lined up over at our Office of Student Affairs registering for kindergarten. And you get to spend time with kids, which is great if you're up here on the 5th floor. Yes, sir.
So before I say semi-critical things, let me just say I agree with everything everyone said. BEEP has been miraculous for our son.
Great.
And I cannot imagine the logistics you have to personally deal with across the board. That said, I feel like BEEP is a perfect place with one eyesore, which is the way geography is handled. And, we started in BEEP January 2014. We're told 4 weeks later we had to move schools for the summer, and then again for the fall. And then got into our new school this past fall, and then now there's a 30% chance you have to move again. And I think for any parent of a 3 or 4-year-old, that's kind of questionable for their development. Now, my son's in an IEP, where transitions are literally one of the number one things on his curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that BEEP faculty are being forced to have IEP discussions with us, where a critical factor is totally ambiguous. And it's not dishonest, but it might as well be, because we can't address a very serious issue. And now, looking toward next year, you might be asking me, does he keep his friends, or does he keep his teacher? That's a ridiculous decision for us to have to make, clinically, and in terms of the spirit of the IEP that we signed.
Yeah.
So I'm just asking you as a parent, that to the degree that 30% remains, I would appreciate it if I just think that BEEP represents, I'm guessing, 2-3% of the population in Brookline schools. I think that at this age, continuity is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can find a way to make that 100%, put us on the list.
Right, so I appreciate that, and I agree with everything you said. We've tried really hard to make sure that when we move something, we have the next X number of years in mind, that it's not just that year. We've been forced to do some things the last couple of years that we're trying not to repeat, right? So, when we set out with those options in December and got the approval of the school committee to look at that plan, we immediately set out to look at this rental space, to look at those modulars. Last year, we built that space at Lawrence School, those 4 classrooms, all in an effort to try to minimize those kinds of moves. And I'm fairly confident. I can't say 100%. I want to be able to say it tonight. I can't until I know exactly where we are with those modulars and whether they work and whether the timeline works out and all those kinds of things. But it is our goal to make sure that works, because we want that second class at the school through next year. We have said forever that was the year that was going to end, because we then have 3 sections across the board at the Heath School. And then our next look will be for longer term kinds of situations, because we don't want to be moving programs around from year to year.
And I appreciate that. I just think that, for us, it's not about
I hear
our
you.
commute. I would drive to Worcester to be in Carrie's classroom.
Yep.
So for me, it's just about if you're...
Okay, we're looking for rental space
Yeah.
then, okay.
For me, it's just about if the kid's on an educational program.
Yep.
Whether an IEP or not, frankly, and continuity is important. I just hope that that's taken into account, in addition to the logistics that you have to deal with that are massive. But there's genuine educational health of the kids going on here, and if the kid's got to move 7 times in 2 years, it sets them back.
Right.
So thank you.
It wouldn't, you went at me as a parent, which is more than fine, right? I as a parent, I completely agree with you. As a superintendent, I agree with you. I try to look at all these decisions through my parent lens, and
Thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
you're welcome. And we will continue to try to minimize that. And again, as soon as I can make the commitment you're looking for, we'll make sure that everyone knows that. But again, the fact I can stand here and say I think we're 70% of the way there, and we have other pieces laid out for the next few weeks that I think will put that further into place, is good news compared to where we were in December on this. And I hear you. I wish we weren't having these kind of conversations at all.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi. How are you? Good. I'm fine, thank you.
I would like to thank you for giving the pre-K designated space. It's lovely with the bathroom, kids are happy, parents are happy, I'm sure. And I also really appreciate you gave us opportunity for us to collaborate. Before Carrie moved back to Heath, you don't really know how much you miss that. You chat with each other, you stimulate each other as teaching. So since Carrie got up there, you always have to talk, is this okay? Can we do this? No, that's not okay. And then, you go back and forth. And I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate you work up your efforts all the way up to 70%. So now I'm counting on that 30%.
Yeah, that's the problem with saying 70, huh? Because we're looking.
Right behind you.
Thank you. What'd you say, cheering me on? Is that what you said? Ah, yeah, okay.
I'll be right there standing next to you.
Thank you. The other point you make, though, we did build the one into these other projects, right, into Heath and into Runkle. I mean, there is something too, and quite frankly, it wasn't the main factor at Devotion. Really, the size of the school was, right, to make sure that we had two. I mean, there is something to making sure there's more than one. I will say, Vicki knows this. We've had a couple of interesting ongoing conversations as all of this continues to sort of unfold. About partnerships with some colleges, local in-town, right over space around creating almost a professional development school on their campus. I mean, some of those conversations got sidelined by their failure to identify some spaces. But we're open to that because one of the reasons we're open to that is it puts more early education classrooms together in one place, right? So more of a center, which doesn't take away from the classes that we still want to make sure we have in buildings, right? I think we can have both, and so we continue to pursue those. Wheelock's a great partner for us. Pine Manor has land. I mean, those are the kinds of. I'm on tape, aren't I? Saying that, yeah. So we've had conversations over the years. They ebb and flow, but it's all in service to this idea of creating more permanent homes and creating this mix of programs that are together and programs that are in schools. So, and not to be overlooked in that, creating stronger partnerships with those universities around the training of future teachers and more people to work with you, all of you. So, yes.
I'm not going to talk about my son because I promised him that he had stopped crying during meetings. But everything you said is true. Now we have to have another meeting. And I did actually offer to drop him off at Catherine's house for the snow days, but she didn't take me up on it. But he's doing phenomenally in this amazing programs that you guys advocate so well for. How would you recommend that parents advocate for BEAD during this time of incredible transition? How can we best support you guys and the program through all this?
So I'm going to take that as a form of the question I've been asked in all three of these forums I've done this week. This is my fourth this week. And that is that, so some people have asked that question about the override and whatever, and there is a committee and there are people involved in that effort, and through our school committee chair would be a good place to start in terms of answering a part of that question, because there are people who have coalesced around advocacy in that way, right? So I think that's a major piece of it. I mean, I think staying tuned in with why do I keep doing that? I think staying tuned in with us in terms of these space issues and monitoring things like our building projects in terms of our ability to create those space. Sometimes, because the spaces aren't reimbursed and because these projects are expensive, there are people who come and say, well, we maybe aren't going to be able to do this or this or this because we don't get reimbursed and this is a very expensive project. That's true, but we say the alternative is we're going to be renting space, right? And so this short-term investment in creating rooms we think is better investment and better long-term for kids. It's always more effective if people hear that from you than from me, always. Yes?
So I appreciate the question. I think the first thing I would just say is that there are a lot of advocates for early education on the school committee.
Yes.
I think we spend a lot of time, treasuring Vicki and trying to tell her at every moment that she is a jewel, that this program is a jewel, and that we're, with all of the moving around in space notwithstanding, it's just something that we continue to invest in and continue to push money towards because of that. So I think that's number one. I mean, Helen Charlevsky has been on the school committee for 20-some years, is an advocate in the state. She's known really well. Many of you know her. We have Lisa Jackson, who has a PhD in education from Stanford, has a background in special education. And Rebecca Stone does policy on it. I work with early ed organizations around the country. So, there are a lot of advocates for it. So we start there, personal advocates.
I will say though that, a lot of these really exciting ideas, like everything else, is dependent on resources to
Right.
be able to fund it. Those resources are, as we've grown, they've all been pushed towards classrooms to keep class size down, because that's obviously a really, really important priority. But what that's meant is that it sort of starved all the rest of the supports around it. Not so much in because in sort of the kindergarten and first and second grade that you all are going into. But I will say that it's let me put it this way, there's going to be a real campaign over the next 7 weeks about this override. And if anyone's interested in learning more, I would be happy to talk to them afterwards. And if you want to learn about the No campaign, you can go learn about that also.
Thank you. Yes?
First of all, I am at Putterham, and I have to say, as someone who hates change, and I was a baker for 23 years, I love our site over there. I mean, our landlords couldn't be nicer, and the space is beautiful. Parking. I know that this.
Oh, look at the time. It's been really nice to be with all of you tonight.
But I can just speak for many of us, and I have to say Regina Watts has taken such good care of us, and really looked out for us. But especially with the snow, I mean, the stress every morning and the anxiety of, will I find a spot? Won't I find a spot? Am I going to get pulled out of my classroom midday because some neighbor is unhappy with where I put my car? I mean, what? And I know there was a big article.
No, I'm happy to address it. I mean, let me start with a sort of a general comment, which is that, one of the things I've discovered here in the last 2 years since the space conversations began and then the override study conversations began is that while people recognize certain aspects of growth, there are other aspects that they're just blind to, right? And so we get what it means on a building, we get what it kind of means on a cafeteria, right, the common spaces. But what we've had a real difficult time getting people to accept is what it means when you say you don't want to build an underground parking garage associated with the XYZ school, but you also say you don't want any of the ramifications of not having done that. I don't get it. You lost me, right? And then you say, wow, I can't believe that here at the ABC school, the parking is so awful, the teachers are spread out 6 blocks around. What did you think was going to happen? We told you we're growing. We told you this school went from 350 to 550 over this time. What did you think was going to happen? We had to move out early, right? So a couple things in this area. First, yes, you probably saw the article. Yeah, that was a great article. We're in a conversation with the Transportation Board around some strategies. And by the way, this is not about where you are right now, but I'll get to where you are. We're in a conversation with them around some strategies we can try. Those strategies made a lot more sense before the T essentially didn't function for a month, but we're still talking about these strategies. So what we've done, is we've paid attention to, we've corresponded with, we've investigated what Cambridge does, what Somerville does, what some of those districts do. And they have some different approaches to these issues. They, for example, for people who are interested in that, they actually incent T-passes, or they at least provide pre-tax T-passes, right? So they do that. They incent people to carpool with certain kinds of incentives, anything from parking that's closer to actually paying some kind of reimbursement, right? So we're looking at all of that, and we're actually in the process of putting together a letter to the Transportation Board saying, here are 3 or 4 of these strategies that we're actually willing to start to try now, right? And that will help us at some places. It doesn't help us at Putter, because there's not public transportation. I had one person in one meeting, one discussion, suggested to me that there was a bus, and when I got done saying, are you kidding me, we went on and had a better conversation. So we have to figure some things out there, because we do have some issues, and we know we have some people, and whether that means actually going in and having Todd Crane work with us on a better kind of parking plan. But some of those incentives, carpooling and whatever, may work. We have to talk to staff. So in all these cases, it's going to involve us, particularly Peter and Peter Rowe, our Deputy Superintendent for Administration and Finance, and his successor, who's coming on in July, to talk with people and see what because different strategies are going to work at different places. But the main issue is, as we go forward with planning schools, right, we have to engage in more creative conversations around parking. So when people come forward in some of these meetings and say, you know, I don't like this idea of enlarging the parking garage at Devotion, I mean, I'm speechless. How do we think we're going to go from a school of 850 to a school of 1,000 with a parking garage that already doesn't work? And the minute we don't enlarge it and don't create some other strategy, I can tell you what the people on Stedman Street are going to be saying. And we're going to be surprised by that somehow. It's inane, right? So we need to go, and we are. So at Devotion, I can't tell you exactly what it is, but we're engaged in a conversation that would create another parking space for during the day where we would have access to that if we allowed certain things in terms of our parking space and the merchants on the weekend. So we're getting creative, right? And that's what we're going to have to do around those places. So we're going to be able to offer some incentives that we're looking at. We're going to be able to offer some creative programs, and we're going to have to get creative in terms of some of the spaces. And in some places like there, we're going to have some difficult conversations with neighbors through the Transportation Board.
Can I piggyback on that? Because that article was outrageous. I'm just shocked that the Transportation Board also executed Brookline to be so bad-mouthing and be so ill-informed in their comments. I mean, I live in that neighborhood, so I know there is no parking in the 51 bus. Come on, it comes every 35 to 45 minutes, not transportation. So that they could have such negative feedback and represent that, but they're part of the town too.
Yeah, I think sometimes, I mean, I'm not going to defend them, they can defend themselves. I think sometimes those conversations get swayed by who shows up and the kind of feedback they're listening to from neighbors. We've had a very positive conversation with the chair and staff since that. I've been involved in 3 meetings around some of these more creative approaches, which again, we're kind of modifying from Cambridge and Somerville and other places that have similar problems to us in this area. We're looking to adapt some of their strategies. And right now that conversation is in a much more positive place. So yeah, you're right. Bad article on a bad day. That's turned out much better since, I think. Yes.
Oh, I have a question. This group might not be as interested at this point, but when they go on to elementary school, do you want to address elementary world language and its impact?
Yeah, I can. So some people that have really tuned into the budget, thank you. Some people that have really tuned into the budget conversation have said, hey, I saw some talk back in December and January about, in a no override scenario, elementary world language was cut. But I see it wasn't in the budget. Why? What happened? And you know, to spend a little bit of time inside my world, right? So the main reason was license, teacher licenses. So here's the deal. People who teach world language are essentially certified in world language, right? They're not certified in elementary and middle grades and something. They're not. They're certified in world language. So if I even put out there today, if the no override budget is our budget, there's no elementary world language program, and I won't be able to tell you that till May 6th, they're not going to wait around. There are elementary world language jobs in other districts right now. There are districts starting programs. They're not going to wait around. So we could be in the really, what I think is a horrible position. Sorry, I'm straying away from the mic. We could be in the really horrible position of having the revenues available to us on May 6th, but having lost 6 teachers. Right? That's what could happen and probably is what would happen. So what we've said is we're not going to do that this year. What we have said is we've done a back of the envelope kind of a calculation on what the budget shortfall is with no override in year 2. And it probably doesn't surprise some of you to know that the shortfall is at least in the neighborhood of $1.2 to $1.3 million, which is about how much the world language program costs. So we've made it clear, we've actually told the teachers that if there is no override, right? If we didn't have those revenues available to us, that program would be on the chopping block for year 2. Minimally, that program would be on the chopping block for year 2, along with all the things that we're doing here in year 1. 5 positions at the high school, 5 positions at the elementary level, the ECS program, cutting our professional development for teachers, and cutting our materials and supplies budgets. Yes, hi, Brian.
Could you talk a little bit about what happens if the override fails and sort of how you see that going out over kind of short term and then longer term? Both for BEEP and then also for, kindergartens and first grades.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, short. So short term means some of it means over the next month and a half, right? Because there are things that we can't wait to do till May 6th, right? Right now we're in a meeting with senior staff today. They're all really happy because we're actually implementing 2 budgets at the same time. So at the same time, we're talking about what positions do we need to post that are in the override budget? Do we need to advertise so that we can begin to fill those if we get to that point on May 6th? We're also spending a half an hour trying to identify which 5 sections would be cut and what happens to the teachers who teach in those sections. Where might they be assigned? What openings might they occupy? That kind of thing. And we have to play both of those things out. So we're in the process of doing some of that now. The good news is, good news. Our union worked with us around notification of teachers. The truth of the matter is that we really tried to target areas this year where probably very few people actually lose a position because of the way we have turnover within the system, right? Even in that no override scenario. But people will be reassigned, right? They wouldn't necessarily be in jobs that they wouldn't be jobs that they're in because of those reductions in sections, those kinds of things. And so there's a lot of that to play out. That has to happen in that week following. Between the 6th and the 8th, we'd have a ton of work to do because we have to give teachers notifications, all those kinds of things. And it's very difficult. It's very, very hard on people, as you can imagine. Teachers can tell you this better than I can, what this is like to be in this position of limbo. It's very difficult. And it's very difficult here to try to play out these scenarios, and for principals to try to play out both scenarios. In 1 minute, you're talking about might we start interviewing people for a position that we've posted as an anticipated opening, a position that only happens if we have those revenues on the 6th. At the same time, you're waiting to talk to a teacher where you're going to say, well, we're going to go from 4 sections to 3 sections in this grade level next year if we don't have the revenues, and this is what would happen. These are the openings you might look at. So those are some of the pieces. And then we're in the process now of playing out year 2 and year 3, right? So we have to play out year 2 and year 3. I've given you this much of year 2 in terms of what we know. We know the shortfall is at least that amount, right? And we know there's a similar shortfall in year 3. So there would be as long as enrollment projections hold, there would be a 3-year reduction in a number of areas, and programs would go, and teachers would go, and class sizes. What we said at the high school is an example of this. I mean, we lose 5 positions, and some people have said to me, what does that mean? Well, it either means class sizes go up, the number of electives offered goes down, or the number of supports, things like tutorial, go down. Or it means all 3. It probably means all 3, right? Yeah, do you want to say something, Liz?
Yeah, sorry to keep interrupting.
That's okay.
So I think that's a really great technical answer. I guess the only thing I would add is, as a parent, from my perspective, this district is a really good district, right? We've got a really, really good education system, and it has good bones. But we've also seen achievement kind of plateau over the last number of years as growth has gone through the roof. And so if you think about, MCAS scores, which was just one score, they were going up, and they really started to plateau over this period of growth. And not only have they started to plateau, but really some of the achievement gaps that we pay a lot of attention to are not only aren't closing, they're wide, some of them are widening. Right. And that's really, really disturbing to us on school committees and superintendents and everyone. So I mean, as you think about what does it mean to not have an additional $7.6 million, the things that are in there, are essentially what has happened, what we have not been able to fund over the course of that growth. So we haven't been able to fund math specialists, literacy specialists, guidance counselors, social workers, nurses, teacher supervision and support. And there's a whole set of things that we haven't been able to do and that we would be severely impaired without an override. So math specialists, we're not able to kind of come back up to the level of math specialists. Same thing with some of the technology pieces. I mean, we've really fallen behind in terms of technology based on some of the other districts. And so there's a little bit we can put in there, it's like $300,000, but with an override budget is $1.2 million. And this is not sort of a Lexus plan here. This is not the cutting edge information technology, education technology plan. This is sort of bare bones, wiring, carts for grade levels, projectors in rooms. This is sort of the basic wiring that you would say, yes, this is a classroom in 2015. This is just, again, if somebody said, this is some things on here are a wish list. I'm like, I have a wish list. If you want to see my wish list, I'm happy to provide it. This isn't it. So and all of that, those kinds of things go away. There's a whole set of money for response to intervention. There's a set of money for regular ed interventions to prevent special ed referrals. So I mean, there's a 24-page budget message that Bill put together that lists all of this in excruciating detail. But just conceptually, as a parent, I don't know if that helps at all, but it really is about the kind of district that we want to be in, the kind of budget we want to support, and that's a lot of the conversation we've had at the school committee level.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, because it really goes back to something I said early on here tonight, right? Which was we have a vision. We've worked very carefully through a vision of where we're trying to go. It is not a want list, right? I have a want list. I'll go get it if you'd like. But this is not it. This is areas that some of you have heard me say over and over again that have been neglected as we've kept up with class size. So we've made sacrifices in guidance, in nursing, in literacy, in math as we've kept up in those areas. And I've said to the Board of Selectmen more than one time, enough is enough. This is the end. This is the end, because as Susan said, what we've seen is we were a district where achievement was rising for all and gaps were closing. And over the last number of years, that achievement has leveled off and those gaps have started to widen. Right? And so we talk about things like regular ed interventions for kids as a preventative measure to special education. I wasn't pleased the other week to be one of 15 districts that were invited, because over the last number of years we've seen an uptick in students of low socioeconomic status being more identified in special education here than the state averages, right? And that's because we don't have those regular education interventions in place that a number of other places do, because we've spent money to keep teachers in classrooms, not on those RTI kinds of strategies. So that's what the plan, those are the kinds of things that the plan allows us to do. So I have to say one more. So every time I come in front of this group in particular, I have a child who's I'm going to brag for a minute. Is that okay? Yeah. Can I do that? Great, thanks. So I have a child who this is a great day in the Lupini house. Great day. So I have a child who started out in an early education program in Beverly, where we live, at age 3. She's legally blind. She's an achromat. She's missing rods in her eyes and has a nystagmus, a movement of the eye, and benefited from a terrific early education program. It's one of the reasons, Vicki knows this from the day I interviewed here, one of the big reasons I'm such a big fan, because of what it did for my family, and particularly with Kristen. Kristen's a senior now. She's the youngest of my 3. And we are in a really lovely college acceptance process, and she got accepted today to her number 1 choice. I don't know if her mother's real happy about that, because it's the furthest one away too. But we'll see when I get home whether her mom is happy about that. But really, that all started in really quality early education programming. So I'm with you. I'm with you. I've done a couple of those things at a couple of meetings over a number of years, and so we've really benefited from these types of programs. And I know we have a terrific program. We have great leadership. We have great teachers, and I'm happy that we're able to support that program and that it provides such terrific service for all of you. And thanks for coming tonight. Okay.
Thank you.
So if if folks would like to stick around for a little bit, and I know there are lots of questions. Hi, well, I should introduce myself. I'm Kareem Abdul-Mateen, a Putterham parent, and I'm president of the PTO. And we get noticed, I try to keep a low profile. You probably heard a lot more from other folks. But I know there's a lot of questions about the override, and Dr. Lupini is unable to answer them properly. So we have another BE parent, right? Yeah. Brian Hoffman, is that correct? Yeah. Who's in the town with the town meeting, has offered to give a short presentation and answer any questions anyone might have. And he doesn't have the same restrictions as Dr. Lupini, so you can feel free to fire away. So if you're willing to stick around, please do so. It's great to have everyone here.
How are you?